HRN listeners. As we celebrate our 15th year, we are deepening our commitment to giving voice to the next generation of food systems storytellers, and we need your help. Our internship and fellowship programs help activate new possibilities for underrepresented and underestimated young people through experiential journalism, audio engineering, and production training. Through these unique programs, HRN helps food equity stewards build essential workforce readiness skills that expand their potential and foster economic mobility. Please consider supporting these critical programs. And with a minimum donation, you can be entered to win a dinner for two at an amazing restaurant in one of 8 cities and tickets to a concert at a great venue in one of those cities. We have incredible partners across the country who have donated, as they also share our passion for helping to educate the next generation of food systems storytellers. Check out heritageradionetwork.org/15 to donate and enter to win today. That's heritageradionetwork.org/15 to donate and enter to win today. And make sure you donate before March 31st. Thank you.
You're listening to Heritage Radio Network.
You're listening to Heritage Radio Network. Since 2009, Heritage Radio Network podcasts have been exploring the wide world of food, beverage, and agriculture. Learn more at heritageradionetwork.org.
This episode is brought to you by Wisconsin Cheese. We do more varieties and flavors of cheese than anywhere else on Earth. By pushing the boundaries of what cheese can and should be, find your next favorite cheese at wisconsincheese.com.
Welcome to the Grape Nation, your weekly wine journey. Our guest is Stephen Bitterolf. We'll talk to Stephen about his new book, wine, and a lot more. We'll taste a real treat from Stephen's portfolio for our weekly wine sip. I'm your host, Sam Ben-Ruby. Stay with us for the Grape Nation on the Heritage Radio Network. We bring wine to the people. Stephen Bitterolf has been on the New York wine scene for decades, morphing from art to retail to importer. He is the founder of Von Boden, a wine import company representing and supporting small growers and really what they do. Stephen has been instrumental in finding and bringing the best growers to the market, specializing in German wines. Think Keller, Stein, Becker, Ludisch, along with the upcoming and avant-garde. That's Von Boden. He's the creator of Riesling Fire, and he just wrote his first book not that long ago, Von Boden, 10 Years of Hoxton Mosels, a personal and informative journey. Welcome back to the Grape Nation, Stephen. You were last on the Grape Nation. It was episode 95, just to give you reference. I think we're at about 280. Ooh. And that was January 9th, 2019. Mm-hmm. Interesting in two ways, pre-COVID, because we know how COVID changed the world. And I guess Von Boden was around 5 then, right in the middle of where we are today.
Yeah. It was our adolescence, as it were, if we're adults now. It may not be.
All right. So I want to get into a lot of stuff with you. And, we talked about this and we'll let it go wherever it goes. But, let me kick it off with some general wine stuff. And, I think we'll get into the book, but the book may weave itself in and out.
I'm going to shamelessly plug it at like every moment in the interview. So don't worry about that.
I'm okay with that. Armin will come in and drag you out of here.
Exactly. That's fair.
All right. So we all know that Teutonic wines have been underappreciated for, too long. We also know, interestingly, that they've been Somm favorites forever. Walk into a good restaurant and the Somms just love it. But I give you a lot of credit, and you deserve these accolades for being instrumental in bringing these wines to the forefront in the U.S. And you deserve that recognition, and that has a lot to do with you. So we're going to talk about all of that. We're going to talk about your life. which and von Boden, which is really intermingled and intermingled in the book.
Yeah.
But I want to ask you a few things. This is sort of a silly question, but I'm curious. In the 10 years that you've been running von Boden, and if you read the book, you were like a deer in the headlights the first week, logistics and all that. Tell me how your world, von Boden, tell me how things have evolved, changed. You know, you face different challenges today. Good things going on.
Yeah.
Just give me sort of an update.
Yeah, I think the big picture, and you kind of introduced or you alluded to the idea, is that it's like a running joke in the German wine community, right? Pushing these wines, not exactly 20 years ago, but too close that I'm comfortable with, but certainly 15 years ago. And people would always say, man, when is the moment for German wine, right? The Psalms, everyone in the know knows. And so it was almost a running joke that it would just be, when, and next year is it going to happen? When is German wine going to happen was always the kind of question. And I would always defer and just say, oh, definitely next year. Definitely next year.
But really knowing or not?
Oh, for sure. Yeah. You just, you kind of just throw it out in the universe and you see what happens. Definitely next year. It almost just became a joke. It was my my stock answer.
Right.
And honestly, when I look back now, I think it happened last year or 2 years ago or 3 years. In other words, it has arrived and it is in the rearview mirror, and we are going forward into a new landscape where people are interested. The pushback that I would get on people in their 60s, 50s, 40s, and I'm in my 40s. It's not connected to a world that new buyers in their 20s and 30s know or care about. Right. The whole issue of residual sugar and Riesling and all these other things that were just these bugaboos for German wine. It's not there anymore. I talk to people about Riesling, younger people, and by young, you can be in your late 30s, as far as I'm concerned, even in your early 40s. They don't care. Tell me about the grape. Tell me about the people. Tell me about this wine. And they go to it in a way, and I think I give a lot of credit to natural wine for this. They go through the wine to the place and not vice versa. Right. In other words, it's not, do I like German wine? I don't really think I do before you even taste it. They go to the wine, they like it, and then inform me or don't. That's fine either way. And so I think the landscape since we last talked 5 years ago, whether this translates to like economics and huge sales and, rising prices, that's not the point I'm trying to make. The point I'm trying to make is that German wines, I'm still in business. Maybe that's my exhibit A and proof that German wine has arrived, because I'm still here and there's more interest than ever.
So I guess that's a tribute or testimony that the wines have always been terrific, but haven't really been exposed, technically imported, like you did. And as you got your mojo going, the younger market, which literally knew nothing.
Yeah,
they embraced it. We talked about this a little off air. They're all about the story.
Yeah, 100%.
Organic, biodynamic, natural, but we'll get into that.
Yeah.
But they want to know the story, and producers in Germany are all about that, right? Everybody's got a decent stuff.
And if I were to pat myself on the back or just to acknowledge an angle I took, not unconsciously or subconsciously, maybe both, I was always more interested in the people and the place. I've said this before, but I studied art history and I came to New York to get my PhD, and it didn't work out.
Did you get the PhD?
I did not. The professor I literally came to New York on a bus to study with wasn't taking grad students that year. And so then I was in New York. I was waiting on tables, was scratching together a life.
Stupid question. You came here finding out he wasn't taking it?
Yes.
Or
No, I came here, I applied, and I was rejected. And the answer I got was that he wasn't taking students that year. So maybe I could have applied the following year, but it's not. It's people who've come to New York know it's not easy, right?
No. But look what happened.
I'm thankful. But when I found wine, I found it scratched the itch, right? I could take all the things I knew and loved about art history, take the painting away, and put the bottle of wine in its place. And it's the same thing. You're studying history, you're studying culture, you're studying language, you're studying place. The reason the Renaissance, the Italian Renaissance, looks different than the Northern Renaissance, it's the same exact reason Chianti feels different than the Pinot Noir we're drinking from the moment, right? It's just, it's cultural history. And it's cultural history, it's a little easier to sell, and you can...
So that that all lines up and makes sense. I want to go backwards a little. What was the opportunity or the place or the wine where you realize, shit, this is like, standing in a gallery looking at a good piece of art. I'm just drinking it. Was it through friends? Was it not that romantic? I mean,
Yeah, no, I wouldn't say it was that romantic. I mean, I was interested in wine. I'd worked in restaurants, right? When I came to New York again,
so you were getting around
yeah,
more
I had
people.
I had three different jobs when I first came to New York, right? As everyone does.
Right.
And one of them was waiting on tables. And so that was, my father's Austrian. We had wine at home. It was never fancy wine by any means. But we had wine. That was a part of the landscape, I would say. And then working in restaurants, it became interesting. And then as I kind of got further into the art world, so I didn't get into art history school, but I started selling works. I was an artist on the side, as most, I guess waiters are at some level. And I was selling the work. And all of a sudden I had a gallery in New York. I got a gallery in London. So I was selling the work. And then I got more into wine. But truly, I didn't make the connection until I was working in wine, which is a number of like happy accidents. And then I started writing emails about them, and I started doing the historical research and trying to discuss the wines in ways that was beyond it. This is, the early 2000s. So the language for selling wine at that moment was 1999, 98 points, Robert Parker, right? That was to some extent the beginning and the end of how people talked about wine. And so at the retail place I worked at, Crush in New York, we talked about the people and the history and the place and why it tasted a certain way. And it was writing these emails that I realized that this is what I love. I mean, I love a glass of wine. I love a bottle of wine. But honestly, more than the wine, I love the culture of it. I love the people. I love the places.
I want to talk to you about that. But
that's it.
When you started writing about it, was that sort of like from the heart and this is how you explain it? Or do you sit there and say, I need to promote and market these wines, I'll do it this way?
There was no strategy.
Right. It was what,
yeah.
It's
just what came out. And I do think that there's so many algorithms, there's so much strategy, there's so much horseshit that's spun in the service of moving goods efficiently, quickly at the highest margins possible, that when you speak openly without an agenda, much more than love, to put it in an honest way, if not cliched, people, it's like having water thrown in your face, cold water thrown in your face after walking across the desert. People respond to it. And it's not hard to do. The problem is you have to actually care and you have to be authentic. But I do think people smell that in the same way you smell body odor. It's just real and it's there and someone has it or you don't. And when people care and when people speak authentically in this day and age, people listen because we all want that. We all want connections and we want some reality, and we're filled and we're shown so much calculated nonsense.
And we both agree that there's not enough of that
100%
in the wine business, in virtually,
and probably most businesses, right?
Yeah. I mean, you could really feel it and see it when it's happening, and you could see when it's not done and when it's done poorly.
But I would push back. I do think I was doing, again, part of my like 16 jobs at all times. One of the things I was doing at a certain point was working on writing for reindications of pharmaceutical drugs, right? So it was like, this antidepressant, it also is good for headaches. And you do reindications, big law. And I mean, it's, one of the ways of making more and more money to people who already have money. And all the people who I worked with just seemed tired, almost chronically sick, right? Everyone had a cold, a flu. You're just running constantly. These things were relentless in their pace and kind of duration. And when I got into wine, part of the love was not only the winemakers and the places, but the people in wine. I mean, there's so many fascinating, wild, interesting people with
crazy.
My background is not particularly unique. When you look at the spectrum of people in the wine market, I mean, to me, there's some of the most fascinating, authentic people. It's just, it's been a joy, honestly, for 10 years.
I think that is expressed through the people in your portfolio, and how you talk about them. And we'll talk about some individual things. Go back for a second about ratings and all that, because the last thing with these wines, your portfolio, is really ratings, and there's a good analogy you've made to art. I mean, you don't walk around a gallery and say, whoa, that Picasso, that's a 9.
Who'd ever do that?
The whatever
Yeah.
is a 7.
Yeah.
You just don't think of it that way. So
Why are we so comfortable with wine? Because in the end, if you know, maybe it's an argument, a philosophical argument that you would disagree with, but I would propose that wine is just a cultural product in the exact same way music is, or film, or visual arts. And we would never stoop so low as to do that, to do some numeric categorization of how Pollock compares to Picasso, compares to Cindy Sherman, compares to whoever.
But why did it happen? I mean, people drink wine more than they go to a museum. You know, wine is a little more intimidating and mysterious to people, so they're looking for some
really
guidance.
than modern art? I mean, come on. I don't think it's more intimidating than most people walk into a contemporary gallery right now, right? And there's like a bundle of dirty sheets in the corner, and that's the installation.
Oh my God,
It's challenging too.
Yeah.
I think with wine, it came from a good place. And, you know, a lot of what was happening here, the history I'm speaking of was before my time, and so I'm speculating. But I do think Parker came to the forefront as a consumer advocate, right? In other words, there was
I think that was his intention.
Yeah, there was a lot of family crests and kind of historical family mumbo jumbo that was selling, you know, the emperor had no clothes. And I think his purpose initially was to kind of call things out as they were and not based on history or lineage or Bordeaux rankings or whatever. So I think it came from
advertisers.
100%.
You know, he was independent.
100%. So I think it came from a good place, and it was just an alluring drug that we all took at one point, right? It was the pill. It just makes the world easier. And there's so much complexity in everything, whether you're talking politics or wine or art. You have to sometimes hold multiple ideas in your head at the same time. And it's harder to do, but you have to do it. Or you should do it.
I guess so. All right, let's get into you know, sort of what you're doing, how you did it. I want to ask you a question that you set me up for, literally. That's very relevant, you know, to this talk. And what it is you represent some of the best winemakers in the world. Winemakers, not German wines, Austria, some of the best winemakers in the world. Tell me if this sounds familiar.
All right.
How did you actually find the wines you import and the growers you represent?
You're quoting a beautiful book.
I'm quoting a beautiful book, but it's really relevant because as people at the end, they'll realize, you know, this isn't just, you know, this is a region and people and a certain vibe and all of that. Because at the beginning, I mean, you may even want to break into a story. I mean, you were talking to winemakers with zero experience, you're not begging them, but just hoping they would listen or respond.
Maybe begging in certain instances.
Maybe. All right. So,
how does someone start a question, or how does someone start a business, an import business, and how do you select the growers you work with, and how does it all come to be? Right.
I mean, that'd be a good frame for moving forward for us.
In the book, which you're alluding to, Von Boden, 10 Years of the Hawks and Mosels, now available at vonboden.com, deals with that. And a little bit, it was not, maybe, it's probably therapy, right? Everything we do is sort of the therapy. It was trying to come to terms with what I've done with the last 10 years of my life and why, right? You basically take a journey, and while you're making the decisions that steer the wheel left or right, you're just doing it, right? You're working off intellect, but also emotion, off of intuition, instinct, these things, right? And then after doing it for 10 years, you look back, and I did it looking back over the 10 years of Von Boden. I did it largely to try and answer questions for myself of why I made certain decisions at certain points and how this kind of book came together. And it was in all cases, not all cases, maybe. The wine is always the key. It's the door that opens, right? So you have a wine, you're interested in it, or you hear about a place and then you have wines from it. And that kind of opens the door into this world. But it is always the grower who is sort of the person that whose eyes you see the region from, and whose introduction kind of paints the landscape for you, right? And so it was through the growers that I really connected with different regions, different styles, different grapes. And it was always, always, always the people, right? And when it began, I was still in retail. And I'd become very good friends with 4 growers. So the initial Von Boden.
From retail,
yeah. So I had been a strong advocate for them.
you talk to them? They come into town. You would do a market trip there. I mean, would you connect?
Both.
So
Yeah.
you would work on a better connection with them, taking advantage of where you were.
Yeah, 100%. And in New York, the growers would come here. So, it was fairly common to meet growers. And at the
Give
time,
me a specific
Yeah,
name,
so
like one of the
four of them. The four initial ones are Lauer, Florian Lauer, Uli Stein, Weiser Kunstler. So that's Alexandra and Konstantin. And then Julian Hart. Those are the four. And the first three, I don't believe I'd met Konstantin and Alexandra in New York. I don't think they came, but Florian Lauer for sure had, and Uli Stein had. And they came to Crush, the store I was working at, as they went to Chambers Street, a number of other stores. And I remember vividly being in the wine business and loving selling wine. And, at the time we were selling some fancy Burgundy and some fancy champagnes. And, you bring a sizable order and there's an adrenaline rush. You're like, ooh, that felt good, right? Woo. Even though you don't personally see that money, it just feels good to connect.
That's what you're there for.
Yeah, you feel like you're in the big leagues, right? I just hit a home run. And then I meet these growers and we're not in an arena anymore. It's not, there's no home runs here. It's more just the people. And I remember feeling like, this is what I want.
It changed the whole paradigm.
Changed everything.
In a way.
Yep. So no longer was I so interested in the big sale or the kind of adrenaline rush with the market. I was more interested in being with the growers. And then I would start going to Germany, always on kind of reconnaissance for the retail store. And I knew it after the first trip. I mean, this is the honest to God truth. I knew it the first time. I still remember being with Uli Stein in 2007, I think was when I first met him, and going to Haus Waldfried in his home and just being like, this is the coolest place on earth. I feel more at home here than I do anywhere else on the face of the earth. And now almost, we're barreling towards 20 years later. And the thrill is 1,000% the same. I'm going to Germany in about 10 days and I can't wait to be there.
But take me to that point where, you're working at the store, you meet these guys, you meet them a few times, you do some market trips. But at some point you decide, I'm bailing, starting my own company. I'm in Germany now. You go to Uli Stein and say, no, I'm not here for Crush.
Yeah.
I'm starting an import company. Are you in? I mean, do they look at you like you're joking, right? Or
yeah, there's the narratives with each of them, right? So this happens, and it happens very quickly. They had an importer, at least three of them did. Julian Hart had just started his career. He didn't have an importer, and that was an introduction through Keller, but we can talk about that. The first three, though, they're friends to some extent, right? I know them. They know me. I think they respect me and what I'd done for them through retail, but they had an importer that had kind of quit and went out of business. And so I went there kind of pitching myself with genuinely the intent that I was just the guy who's just going to bring them into New York and sell them to some friends. It was not a business proposal. And to some extent, I thought,
vibe you.
Yeah, I'm going to sell to.
You didn't do the importer pitch.
No, I didn't have a company, right? It's like I'm going to bring.
But
them
even
in.
if you did, you wouldn't do that pitch.
I wouldn't do it well because I didn't have a company. It's hard, right? But I sort of go there, and then all of a sudden, some other importers showing up, like real importers, like Louis Dresner, right? And all of a sudden, they start knocking on the doors, and I'm like, oh my god! And I was and remain a big fan of that company, and so with them in the market, I'm like, oh my god, I don't stand a chance. Like here's a real company with incredible amount of national respect, to say nothing about just the fact they have a company, licenses, they know how to do it. I had no idea I had nothing, truly almost no money, no licenses, no knowledge of how to do it, no sense of the national market whatsoever. I had a 2.5 or 3.5-year-old son, so I barely got out even in New York, if I was being honest. So I just sort of go to them with all this, and I just sort of say, here's where I am. Yeah, I have nothing. I didn't even have a name at the point. I didn't have
You were pretty transparent about that?
Yeah. I mean,
like certain things you want to
100%.
hide or,
No.
But no?
No, because the truth eventually gets out, right? What am I going to do? Lie and then bring in the wines and just have it all go to shit? So I just said, listen, here's the bad part is I have no company. I have no money. I don't really know how to do any of this. And those are formidable. Like you should take those into account. On the other hand, I truly, deeply love this place and these wines and I will scream from the mountaintops and I will sell these wines with every fiber of my body until it's no longer there. And that's not to be undervalued. And sort of everyone had to make their choice. And Uli Stein said he very, we had a talk, and he was a good friend, but not as close as we are now. To some extent, he's now something of a father figure to me. But we were very close, and he said, okay, Stephen, I think about it. And that was it. And then the next morning he said he woke up and his mind said to go with the other importer, and my heart said I go with Steven. That's my impression. And so he chose me. He and Weiser Kunstler.
Were you there, or was by phone?
Yeah, this was by phone.
Okay.
I had been in Germany and I'd made the pitch, but then I had to go home. Weiser Kunstler, I think, had been talking with Stein, and I have no idea why, because I didn't know them quite as well. I'm trying to think. It's possible I hadn't even visited them before, although I knew the wines and supported them. I can't honestly answer that. I think I had, but I might not have. And then Lauer, we had this big conversation over dinner and going back and forth. And, Lauer it's 10 hectares, which for me is a fairly large estate.
Yeah.
For most people, it'd be tiny, but it was, and he was kind of new. We're about the same age. He took over the estate in 2005. So at this point, he's only beginning his tenure. His father's still a partner in the business. So we have this long talk, and, for him, it was a leap of faith because he was beginning to sell a good amount of wine in the US, and to some extent because of my advocacy, I'd been a really huge Lauer. You can still Google Lauer and Crush Wine Co. and you'll come across like my first email written in, I think, the fall of 2008. And it's a lot of all caps and kind of embarrassing prose, but I was 1,000% earnest about my appreciation of the wines. And so I made my pitch, and I just had to kind of wait. And Florian just said, listen, man, I'll talk to my dad and I'll give you a ring. And then I flew back to the US, and I think 2 or 3 days later he called. And I remember him, my wife, I tell the story in the book, but my wife remembers the call when I hung up. And it was when Lauer said yes that I knew it was going to happen, because you need a certain momentum, right?
Right.
And I knew it was going to happen. And Florian said, yep, I talked to my dad. We're going to go with you. And then he just said,
was his dad involved, or he's just bouncing stuff off of him?
His dad was still retired, but a partner.
Right.
His dad was, kind of his counsel, let's say. And I remember him saying, I'm going to go with you, but my dad says you have to prepay. I had to prepay for the first order, and I was like, fair enough.
That's the rule in the business.
Oh, I mean,
you're not being singled out. Two things.
Yeah.
Is there anyone pretty much after that, or anyone at all, that said no, still is a no, or became a yes?
From that initial tranche, you mean?
Or the next, that first year of building the portfolio.
Well, then Julian Hart was from the beginning. I'd met Julian when he was at Keller doing a kind of an internship or working at Keller. This was some years ago, probably 8 or 9, something like that. And we had a little bit of chat, but nothing much. And Keller made the strong introduction and the recommendation, and Julian, we got along. And I think Julian's a very particular person, and I think he liked me more than he likes most people. And he sort of said yes. And then after that, Vollenweiter was number 5. And so from there, everything developed pretty organically, right?
Is it just because the pitch was so sincere and people were ready for it? Or were people talking to each other? Or
I can't honestly answer that.
It may be really organic.
Yeah.
It may not have been, I called him to tell him. Yeah.
I think, I'll be honest.
The timing was good.
I think they really liked me. And I think they really appreciated the work I'd done in the States. And I think if there was a calculation, which if there was, I don't think it was conscious, but I think to some extent it was like, listen, we're not doing that much business in the US anyway.
Worth a shot.
If we take this kid for a spin and in 18 months he drives it into the ground, like
again,
well, yeah,
timing was good.
We can find someone else.
I guess because of the way people perceive the wines or how they were doing, nobody really gave a crap about going in there and representing them. I mean, Dresdner's an example.
Yeah.
Was there much more of that?
Dresdner, Grand Cru kind of approached Steinmetz and a few people, I believe.
They're not much of a German portfolio.
No,
Grand Cru.
No, they're not. But they, people were interested. And I think, I can't speak for them, but I do think they recognize quality, right? And so there's always a balance of like, this is quality. I understand this is really good wine, and I think they recognize this kind of new landscape of dry and more natural-esque wines being made in Germany, and so they want to engage. But Germany has always been a very particular place, right? And a number of people, friends and people in the business, for whatever reason, and I think this is going to change. I hope it will change, to be honest. But historically, when we look back over the last 10 or 20 years, the only people who have done well with German wines in the U.S. market are German wine specialists, and that's just how it is, right?
It's not that forgiving. I mean, you got to sort of be a specialist in that sense.
Yeah.
Just the sales and marketing background in me. Once you get things up and running, do people start picking at you? Like, hey, we're bigger, we're better, we have better distribution, relationships. Or everyone was so not convinced, but bought into it's you and you'll do it right.
You mean like the growers or people in the U.S. market or
Importers?
I think,
You laid a little
yeah.
groundwork. So you know how it works.
Yeah.
People come in and, you did the work. Now I'll take them away because I'll pay them more money. You do it with athletes.
Yeah. I mean, we'll see. That's so far has never happened. And I hope in the end,
I don't think it will.
the growers are fair. I'm fairly close with them. I would hope, but I do think, to be honest with you, the first 5 years, and frankly, probably still now, I'm so insignificant when it really comes to the money that is made in the wine market, meaning French wines, Italian wines.
I don't think scale is the argument here. I think it's about the quality, the story. The book is incredible.
Yeah.
I mean, the book of your, winemakers.
I will say then, I'll say this then, unless people are talking lots of crap behind my back, which is possible, most of the feedback I've had from other importers, and I don't know if it's good or bad to put people on the spot, but have been really positive, and people have been appreciative. And I think the methodology I use, which focuses on the grower, is one that, that I didn't invent. If I look back, and again, I'm not there for the genesis, but like a Kermit Lynch would have done that. A Rosenthal did that. Becky Wasserman, who's kind of one of my heroes.
Yeah, but that's a handful of, many more that don't. Yeah. You're in that category. And I do agree the way people understand who you are, perceive, look at the business, I think that's been established, and that's a compliment. You talked about the grower, and we talked about it a little. To you, the grower's the hero. You said you see the wines and the place through their eyes. Yeah. To the point where you said the grower is more important than the wine in a way.
Yeah.
Tell me more about that.
So I have two things I would say, and this is maybe provocative, and I put it in the book a little bit just to throw ideas out there and to see how people respond to it. But I'm almost in a place where that is 100% the case, where the hypothetical question is, what would you rather have? Would you rather have a crappy wine from a beautiful human being or a pristine wine from an evil human? And to me, the answer, that very simplistic binary equation, the answer is obvious. I would much rather drink a crappy wine from a really perfect human. The good news is you don't have to, those aren't the options. The options are, would you rather drink great wine from great people or mediocre wine from bad people? There's a million shades of that gray, but I would always go more towards the people. And the truth is, and this is a little bit, it's like some bizarre wine world riff on dogs look like their owners, right? There's a connection. I think there's some connection. Good people focus on quality and the depth of relationship with their landscapes and are attentive to the environments they're in. And all that leads to good wine. So oftentimes it is the person, and it is the way they interact with everything. The wine, the cellar, other people, animals, humans, right? That influences and colors the wine. And so to me, it just has evolved that way, where I'm more interested to some extent in the people than the wines, although the wines, are that linked too. I mean, they're not irrelevant by any means, but I do think it's useful, especially in this world of kind of an artificial binary break where we have the natural wine world and the classic wine world, and they're like two opposing camps. To me, look to the human and look to scale. That is the big picture, kind of top of the pyramid thing that we should be focusing on, less on did they filter or not, or how many sheep do they have in the vineyard. More, what is the scale of the winery, and what is the tapestry of that society that they're a part of, right? I would rather have, and we had talked about this, I'd rather have a fine wine that is artificially yeasted and filtered from a small family estate than I would an organic and biodynamic, unfiltered natural wine from a corporation.
And the reason is you would trust that guy did that because that's the most logical thing for.
Yeah, people who are in the vineyards with their children and their families and whose name is on the label of the wine are going to make decisions that are sometimes contextual, right? If they had a huge rainfall and they need to spray some fungicides, they might. But
right.
As an art history dork living in New York, I'm in no position to tell a family who lives off of agriculture how to do their job. I have to trust in the people and the decisions they make. And I think good people make good decisions. They might not always fit in the nice little bucket, but I would rather have them making decisions. And I also would rather support that landscape, right? If how we buy things and what we buy creates the world we live in, I would rather create a world of small scale independent producers than I would of large corporations. And that is true in wine, what we're talking about, but it's true in everything else as far as I can, right?
I agree. I mean, you and I talked off air that these guys are kind of, let's not talk about organics, biodynamics. There's a lot of good principles, practice, and all that. But these guys, they're more naturally natural. They do what's natural, not what the definition is.
And
you can't use this much salt or whatever and all that. And you just sort of described that, and that's what they are. And, the choice of that, versus living to the definition, it's two different wines, possibly.
Yeah.
And all
And I would suggest, and I think this will develop naturally, pun intended, over the next few years, that people will talk about scale, and scale will be the thing to think about.
What do you mean by that?
I mean, it changes for different landscapes, right? In the Mosel, 5 to 10 hectares is almost as much as a family can farm. In the Rheinhessen, where it's flatter, maybe it's 20 or 30 hectares, right? I don't want to create another bucket where it's like everyone under 20 hectares is a small grower and everyone above 21 hectares is no longer. But scale insofar as it's a family operation and there are people, and again, this connection between the person's name on the label and the fingers in the dirt, I think is an important one, because that implies a certain connection and a certain depth of the person's relationship to the land, which isn't the case in a corporation.
I agree with that. You shouldn't get caught up with, numbers based on, but in that, in Germany, it's only going to go so far. I mean, it's kind of set up where it's not, for what you do, there's a lot of opportunities, where the scale will remain at a level, that you feel good about.
Yeah.
I don't know the answer to this, and I'm sure you would, but it's hard. And we could do a whole show on this, but just give me your take. I have no idea if climate change is affecting these guys, if how, and what do they have to do? What are they forced to do? Like, Champagne's been affected. There's a sparkling wine industry in England because of. Is there effects there? I mean, you've been in the weeds so deep for so long.
Yeah. It's huge, right?
What's going on?
Yeah. So in the book, I kind of outline this, and I do think there is like an incredible renaissance happening in German wine right now. I think it is, again, this thing, is it happening next year? No, it happened a few years ago. The renaissance is happening and it is in full swing. If you have your eyes open and are tasting authentically, you taste it. I mean, put not all, but put the top Pinot Noirs from Germany now next to the top Pinot Noirs from Burgundy. It's getting.
You don't have to convince me.
It's a different style, and I'm not trying to propose some simple formula that they're better. It's just they are different, and qualitatively, I think we're talking about really unique worlds. That it's perfect right there, but they are in the same arena at this point. So this renaissance is happening, and there's 3 reasons. One is a kind of return to the vineyard, right? That the growers are, and this is not unique to Germany by any means, but it's true to kind of the, post-technology Europe, where growers are getting away from the tractors and the machines and the kind of more recipe-like winemaking, and they're paying attention to the nuances and doing the things that their grandfathers or grandmothers did, right? So this return to the soil is a big factor.
Wait, is it fair to say at some point they were doing that, maybe during or after the war, there was a reason to change, and now get back to, that's kind of the curve?
Yeah, the curve, roughly speaking, the curve at least is, you have the pre-war kind of industrial, the pre-commercial, and so viticulture.
That's part of number 1.
That's part 1. And then part 2 is climate change, for sure, right? And Germany remains sort of on the edge of ripeness. That is the magic of German wines insofar as the grapes. It really is Frank Schoonmaker, this author I really like, who wrote the last book on German wine, by an American for an American audience.
How long ago?
In the 50s.
Oh boy.
He wrote this book and he calls it the line of viticulture, right? That when you get above this, grapes just can't ripen to the point where you can make wine. And so Germany's dance, the heart and the soul and the beginning and the end of German wine is high acid. You're playing with that razor's edge. And historically, that was a dance that was really difficult. And 1 or 2 years out of a decade, they'd get it right. And the wines would just be angelic and crystalline and right, just on this most evocative, intense dancing energy. And the other 8 years, they'd be sour and watery, right? It's just
20%. That's a crappy batting average.
Schumacher would say it in the 50s, in the post-war period in Germany, they would say Czar wine. So meaning this is the wine where Lauer is. This is the valley where Lauer is. Egon Müller, Van Volksem, Zilliken. People know these wines. The Czar was either a beggar or a lord. So that meant 8 years out of a decade, it would be a beggar. The wines couldn't get to full ripeness. And the 2 years out of a decade, it would be incredibly perfect. Now, the last underripe vintage in Germany, most people say, was 1987.
Wow.
So, and Egon is selling TBAs for 20,000 euros a bottle. The Czar wine is now a lord. There's no doubt about it. But that's a huge issue.
So people know Egon, tell them who Egon is and tell them what TBA is.
Yeah, Egon Müller is perhaps
legendary.
Perhaps the most famous estate in the Czar, and one of the most famous estates in Germany, renowned for these very rare and limited sweet wines. So TBA is a Trockenbeeren Auslese. It's a sweet wine.
Which is a classification for sweet wine.
Exactly. Made from exclusively dried shriveled grapes, excuse me. So very rare and very expensive. And I don't want to get too into that because that's, to some extent, it's the 0.00001% of German wine. And I want to talk about the other 99.
So let's not. But did you do the third thing? We did one too.
What was the third thing? Do you remember?
I don't know if you did it. The first one was, I forgot.
Return to the Vineyards.
The second one, right?
Climate change. Or Three Elephants in the Room. What is the other one? I can't remember offhand.
All right. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to take a break, and hopefully during the break, it comes back. I'm probably going to have to, the break will take a little longer because I'm probably going to have to beat the crap out of Stephen with his own book to maybe get him to do it. We're talking to Stephen Bitterolf. Stephen is the proprietor of Von Boden, the most terrific German, Austrian, they do wines in the U.S., but a German specialist. When we come back, we're going to jump into the book a little more and, where the book takes us, which is more about growers and regions and, all that other stuff. So you're listening to The Grape Nation on the Heritage Radio Network. We'll be right back.
This episode is brought to you by Wisconsin Cheese. Wisconsin, the state of cheese, makes half of the nation's specialty cheese and wins more awards than any other state or country. Our heritage and traditions, master cheesemaker program, and the American propensity for innovation all put Wisconsin on the cutting wedge of cheesemaking. With over 600 varieties of cheese to choose from and 5,500 national and international awards and counting, get ready to turn your refrigerator into a trophy case. Enjoying a Wisconsin cheese is basically like winning a gold medal in culinary achievement. Set your mind at cheese. When you bite into a wedge of Wisconsin Wonderful, you know it is made with the ultimate skill and passion possible. Find your next favorite cheese at wisconsincheese.com.
All right, we're back. We're back with my guest, my friend Stephen Bitterolf, Stephen from Von Boden. Stephen, you wrote a book called Von Boden, which is your company. And the full title of the book is Von Boden, 10 Years of Hocks and Mosels, which I feel, is a kind of a personal and informative journey. Let's get a couple of vital things out of the way, and then we'll really talk about it. Let's talk about the title. People may go Hocks and Mosels. Mosels, not
Moselles.
Right, not the Moselle.
Yeah.
Tell me.
Man, sometimes I do things and I'm like, why did I do this?
Okay.
No, there's a reason. I love the history of all of this, right? I love the fact that they've been making wine in Germany and the Mosel for 2,000 years. Part of the allure of wine to me is its connection to the past. And with German wine, you have this really interesting situation. I think it's fairly unique to German wine, although there's probably French writing as well. But the Brits were incredibly interested in German wines, right? And so there is a history of British writing about German wine that goes back to, it's hard to find the books. I've been able to trace them back to the beginning of the 19th century, so 1820s, 30s, 40s. And then you can still find books pretty easily from the late 19th century and early 20th century. So in that period, for reasons I think are so bizarre, a Hock was a Rhine wine. So that would include, for people who know the regions, wines from the Nahe, from the Rheingau, from the Rheinhessen, from the Pfalz, which was called the Rheinpfalz back in the day. So a huge swath of land. That was a Hock. And it's named after one of the villages in the Rheingau, which is Hochheim, spelled Hochheim. And this is Hock. Who knows why? But a Hock is a Rhine wine. And a Moselle is a Mosel wine. For whatever reason, British writers writing and speaking and talking in English would use the French word Moselle. The Moselle is a river that begins in the western side of the Vosges Mountains in France. So that's the French. The Moselle in France is the Moselle. When it gets to Germany, it's called the Mosel. For some reason, English speakers would use the French term to refer to the German wine region. So Hocks and Moselles were sort of the entire universe of German wines. You either had a Hock or you had a Moselle. And it's very common parlance up to, I believe Schumacher uses Moselle as well. So we're talking about post-war period, 50s, 60s, and some point in the 70s, they drop the Hock and it becomes a little bit more specific, Nahe, Rheingau, Rheinhessen, blah, blah, blah. But it's a really interesting history that I sort of tip of the hat to. So it's German wines, Hocks and Mosels, that's it.
All right. I get why you did it now. Your
Should I have
love of
done it?
history, it's a little ironic, the whole thing. I mean, I like that. How did the idea of the book come about? I think we talked about that a little before, how you...
Yeah, I mean, so there has not been... So exactly what we're talking about, right? There's a huge history of British people writing in English about German wine, and there is a very scarce, almost non-existent history of Americans writing about German wine. Frank Schumacher wrote this book in the 50s exclusively about German wine for an American audience in English. And to my knowledge, no one has done it since. And not only is that, so we're talking about a 50, 60, 70-year period, like a huge amount of time. Not only is that wildly significant, but German wine has changed so dramatically in the last 20 years that even if someone had written a totemic canonical book in 2000, it would need to be updated right now. In fact, someone did. Stephen Brooke wrote a great book in 2003 called The Wines of Germany that is very good. But things have changed so wildly in the last 21 years that it would have to be incredibly updated. And so that was why I wrote this book, and that is why
when did you realize, let me put my effort and time, find a way to write a book?
I'd kind of been doing it like on the side since the beginning, right? Writing,
right, you had profile descriptions and all
exactly.
that.
Yeah, and writing is... I do, we're pretty active on Instagram. I did a podcast once. Like, I like mediums, but writing to me is, I think I'm fine. I don't think I'm very good, but I'm good enough. And it's a medium that I think is a middle finger to our culture right now, insofar as you have to have time, one word after the other. It's analog in a digital world. And I'm more and more seduced by analog. I'm seduced by things that are hard, limited.
I got a good book for you about how every part of a typewriter. You see it. It's right out 100%. There. Where other things you do your phone, you have no idea. So, last vitals question: when did you literally put pen to paper first, and how long to get to what you thought was?
So it kind of been working on it roughly, little essays and Word files stored here and there. The pandemic was when it really kind of started juicing, because right around March of 2020, and I remember emailing basically everyone in the company at the time. That was like 4 people, basically like, how much do you need to live? And I'm just going to parcel up all the money that we have left and just kind of we'll all take money out until we inevitably go bankrupt in 6 to 8 weeks. The beginning of the pandemic, obviously, with restaurants closing, was like, we're all going under, and that's it. And it was sort of like, every door opens, a door closes. I was like, well, Von Boden door is closing, so I might as well write a book, right? I mean, it's a solitary practice, and it felt like this is probably the time. So that's when I really engaged. And I would say, as we approached the 10-year mark of Von Boden, right? Heading up to 23. So 2 or 3 years later, I realized I'm not going to get this book done in the form I want it to be done for a while. And so I want to publish something just to mark this moment and it's self-published, right? You can only buy it on my website. And that is, I say that with zero shame. I wanted to own it. I wanted to see what it was like to really publish a book, from writing it to proofing it to designing it to picking the paper to working with a design.
You love that crap.
Yeah. I mean, it's again, getting to the analog thing. I want to own it, man. I want to be there on the press, kind of doing it.
And it was a self-teaching thing.
Yeah, 100%.
Which is something you may want to approach writing, whatever topic, with this kind of body of knowledge going forward.
Yeah,
which is
I do think there's like a certain value to tactile knowledge, right? I mean, you started talking about starting an import company or starting Riesling Fire. It's like, sometimes you just have to jump. I had no idea how to throw big events, right? It's just, I don't know, just do it. You kind of have to set a date and then it's locked in and then you just have to do it. And the same with the book. It's like, all right, I'm going to publish a book for our 10th anniversary and let's just do it. And maybe it's crashes and burns. That's certainly a possibility. No,
we know that it didn't.
Well, I mean, I lost a good amount of money on it.
Well, but that wasn't.
That wasn't
the point.
The focus.
Like
no,
everything you're doing, it's it's about the story and what the story can tell. We're going to talk about the book a lot, but describe the book, literally how it's laid out. And I'll tip you off.
Yep.
I mean, at the beginning, it's very personal about you, the stories, and then it kind of breaks into region. Just get into a little more detail.
For sure. So it's 6 by 9, I believe, paperback.
White.
Yeah, exactly. Very austere cover. About 200 pages, lots of color photography. And if at the end of the day, the writing is all crap, there's great photographs.
Lots of photography.
There's
not being facetious.
No, not at all.
Like 2-page spreads.
Yeah, 100%. That's a big part of it, is kind of understanding how the place feels through seeing the landscape. In Germany, the Rhine, the Mosel rather, and Saar are very dramatic, but all the places are incredibly beautiful. So it is, of these 200 pages, 1/3 is discussing, why I did what I did. And again, this was probably more therapy for me, but hopefully it's interesting for you. And it's a moment, right? I mean, I had a 3.5-year-old or 3-year-old. My wife, we would learn very soon after, was pregnant with number 2. So it's, we were getting ready to leave Brooklyn and move to New Jersey. It's a family company. And so it's a personal history, and it is all woven together for me, right? So it's a little bit about that.
That's the first chunk.
Yeah, the first chunk of it is
less photographs at the beginning, more story.
And it's about starting this company, what's important to Von Boden, why I work with certain growers we do, and then a little bit about this moment in German wine. So why is German wine happening right now? What's the history? What are the big picture things to think about when you think about German wine? And again, it's northern latitude, it's high acid and low alcohol. And that's kind of 90% of what you need to know. If you like light, energetic, crisp wines, whether red to white, you have it. That's Germany. And all the remaining 10% are just details. So that's 1/3 of the book. And then
can I just interrupt? Please. And people say I talk too much and interrupt. Can you give me 2 regions that are impressive like that? Is that like the Loire and maybe Portugal or Spain, that
in terms of
that acidity and lower alcohol, that, at least in your mind?
Yeah, I mean, I think, I'm most comfortable, to be honest, with French wines. It's sort of the, so right. I would say Champagne.
Okay.
And Chablis, although oftentimes to me they don't read, but certainly Champagne. And again, sparkling wine, if we talk about sparkling wine, right, in the German wine paradigm that I'm trying to draw here, acid is everything. It's the beginning, the end, the middle. It's everything a grower is talking about. So if you speak of Riesling with a little residual sugar, that is just one tool to make a wine that is otherwise sour taste less sour. Secondary fermentation is the exact same thing. So the fact that Champagne as a cool climate does sparkling wines, this is probably not the case at the moment, but 50 years ago, it was because the still wines were unpalatable and so bracing and sour that a second fermentation was just a trick to make something unsellable sellable.
Crazy.
And the Germans are in a very similar position. So that early history of sparkling wine production was a huge cultural dialogue between France and Germany, right? Krug, Mumm, Heidsieck. These are pretty German names, right? There was a lot of cultural connection.
Funny, right?
And so far as the research,
people don't realize that.
Yeah. So far as the research I can find, there was a huge amount of business done between the Saar and the Mosel, parts of parts of Germany and champagne. They would buy grapes, they would buy still wines, they would buy sparkling wines. Obviously, in the post-war period, that kind of came to a sharp end. And a lot of the sparkling wine houses of Germany went into financial collapse, most of which they're only now pulling themselves out of, right? The fact you could find Lauer 1980s and 90s sparkling wines was not because Florian Lauer is Richard Geoffroy and waiting for the third plenitude to happen, right? It couldn't sell the wines. There was no market for them. Huh? And that was it. And when the market started developing, they pulled them out and they're amazing wines.
So it's not just the personal preference. When you talk about, why German wines are having their time, the high acidity, the nice level of alcohol, bracing minerality and all that. That's what people want, right? I mean, or it's a good food wine, or it became popular with Psalms. It got its own traction because they're great and all of that.
Yeah.
You told the story of how you got the growers to come along, kind of how you started the business, which is semi-romantic. That it's romantic, but boy. But once you got all that going, I mean, one thing that I just couldn't get out of my mind is just setting this business up, which to this day sounds like a nightmare. Logistics, like literally getting the wine over, aggregating it, pallets, all the governmental regulations.
Oh God!
I mean, we're right. I mean, you're better at it, but is still.
Oh, it's horrifying. No, truly, when I look back, and there's companies that kind of help you with compliance and logistics, so you can farm all this stuff out, and I did, right? And we're doing more and more, and frankly, at this point, we're doing it all internally as a company. But yeah, 99% of it is just the most mundane, ridiculous, and not sublime, just absurd, right? It's just moving boxes from one place to the other, and that's the physical reality of the work. But the spiritual and the important side of it is representing these cultures and representing these people and doing everything you can to talk about them and to not only put the wine on the table, but to talk about why it's there and how it fits into this whole jigsaw puzzle of viticultural history, right? Not that it's better than France or better than Spain, but it's also not worse. It's just a different part in the same way. Again, we talk about the Italian Renaissance or the Northern Renaissance. You like Botticelli or you like Dürer. They're just expressions of a place, and they're beautiful all in their own terms.
So you talked about we're talking about describing the book. So the first part is the story. Then we move into
the love letters.
The love letters, which specifically is broken down by region and grower and all of that. All right, so let's segue to that.
Okay.
There are so many regions. Well, compared to maybe Italy or whatever, there's a lot of regions in Germany. Mm-hmm. Too many for us to talk about, but there's a couple I want to hit on, and I invite you to bring up any other ones. It's hard not to start with the Mosel because the title. And is it the largest region?
No. The Mosel is around 9,000 hectares. The numbers are whatever. They're useful in terms.
You could look them up.
Roughly 9,000 hectares, and the Rheinhessen is about 30. So the Rheinhessen is the biggest. The Rheinhessen and the Pfalz are the two big ones, right around 25 to 30,000 hectares, right?
Right.
Which, when you put that into Bordeaux, is around 100,000 hectares. So it's it's big or it's small depending on where you're standing.
So why do people, when they think of German wines, think of the Mosel? Because that's the way it was referred to and written and all of that part of it.
Yeah, I think there's, again, Hocks and Mosels, right? So there's no question that it's one of the most important wine regions in terms of export and history, right? So you have Romans planning these. Trier, which is the oldest city in Germany, it's kind of the main city of the Mosel, is the oldest city in Germany. There's Roman catacombs under it. It's an amazing place. And it was, I think right now it's maybe a little over 100,000 people. In Roman times, it was about 60,000 people. Wow. So it was the northernmost outpost of the Roman Empire. And a lot of the viticulture there is because of the Romans, right? So it has this just kind of incredible depth. They were making wine in the Mosel 2,000 years ago, right? So it's amazing history to it. I think for the U.S. consumer, and to some extent the British consumer, I'll go ahead and speak for the British consumer, being not at all British. is that the Mosel, because it's an extremely cold place, was a very good place to farm Riesling with a little residual sugar to produce those styles of wines. And then the post-war period, those were kind of the defining wines of the time, right? Liebfrau milk and German off-dry Riesling was the natural wine of the 70s.
What is Liebfrau milk? Was that a name or was that a grape?
It is a name originally of a little vineyard in Worms, so in the southern Rheinhessen. Yep, Liebfrau, I think it's Liebfrau Kirchenstück is the site, which is 10 or 12 hectares, not a very big site. And it was one of the most famous vineyards of the kind of Middle Ages and then the 12th, 13th, 14th, 15th century. Who knows? Incredible depth of history. And someone came out with just a little spin on that, like Liebfrau milk. And Liebfrau milk became anything from anywhere. And so Liebfrau milk was often Müller-Thurgau, Sylvaner, Riesling.
These are the grape varietals.
These are different grapes from anywhere in Germany and probably in many cases outside of Germany. So it just became something that was white wine and usually had a little sweetness to it. But this style of off-dry Riesling was the economic force and the style of the post-war period, meaning 60s, 70s, and 80s. And that was, the Mosel was very good at doing this and was really good at kind of exploiting their ability to make wines like this and the kind of romance of some of their vineyard names, right? Like Goldtropfen and Himmelreich and Sonnenur.
Where did Blue Nun come from?
I have no idea.
Yeah, I mean, that was fair.
Yeah,
it's crazy how like the Bonfi guys bring in Riuniti and build up an empire, and some guy brings in Liebfraumilch, and that's like the bad memory of great wines 100%, now.
Yeah,
it's just the craziest thing. You mentioned the Rheinhessen, which is the largest. You said
that is the largest winemaking region in Germany. Yeah.
So I want to stay there because there are wines that I've had from there that are stunning.
Yeah.
At every level, you know, the stuff you can't afford but can get to taste, to the stuff that's available, and that's Keller.
Yes.
And Keller to me seems like an important German wine. Seems like, I mean, all your kids are important to you, but Keller, you know, seems like you know, it's important too. Tell me a little about Keller, the story. That wasn't one of the early 4, 6, 8, 10 guys you spoke to?
I think he's number 7.
Oh, so he was...
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So the way this happened, and I believe this is true, is that I did a big vintage report when I was in retail. So I think it was the 2006 vintage, so written in 2007.
Was that a good vintage or not necessarily?
Not really.
Okay.
No. It was like my first big business trip to like understand the vintage, right? And so I wrote this huge thing about the wines. And I remember this, and I spent so much time on this vintage report. I mean, you know, hours and hours and hours and hours, and wrote so much material. I took all the photos, I cropped them, I did the Photoshop. So I put together this huge thing about a vintage which was difficult. There was a lot of rain during harvest, really botrytis-ridden vintage. But it was just, I was in love with the place and with these winemakers. And it was, again, my first kind of getting my toes wet in this. And I wrote a huge piece. And Keller at the time, we had started... I don't know, to be honest. I don't believe the dry wines were available yet in the US. They had an importer in New York and in California. But the sweet wines, his father was quite famous for making sweet wines. And again, it was a little bit too cold to make dry wines consistently in where they were in the Rheinhessen. And so I'd been buying the wines and supporting them where I could find them, in the gray market or in different markets. And Keller KP, Klaus Peter, wrote me, just emailed me and said he had read my writing, really thought it was good. And he's very good at finding passionate people and inspiring them. And that's to some extent what he did, right? So we kind of established this friendship. He was known and he was becoming famous, but he certainly wasn't at the level he's at now. And he invited me to come to I remember he invited me at one point to do a tasting with David Schultzknecht and Jancis Robinson. It's like, they're coming, why don't you join us? And the 4 of us will have dinner and do tastings. And I was like, wow, there's no world in which I deserve to be at the table with these people, but I'm going to just pretend that this is normal. And that's what I did. So we had dinner together. And then the next day I went and did winery visits with Schultzknecht and Jancis. It was amazing.
So I know Schild kind of was in on that stuff then. Was Jancis well-versed then? Or
yeah, again, because of the British history of German wines.
Right.
Yeah. So
it was there.
Yeah, 100%. And she's famously...
I guess my question is more... how much recognition did she give to it to that point? Write about it, review it. What were her feelings?
That's an
Was
interesting
she
question.
critical? I don't know.
No, she was a huge proponent for, I think the UK history, and I'm speaking a little bit off the cuff. These are my educated guesses, that the UK and the UA market, the UK and the US markets were fairly in sync insofar as in the post-war period liking off-dry wines. But as dry wines became better and better and better, I do believe Jancis was one of the first advocates of dry wines, and indeed of Keller in this kind of marketing, and not a new style because dry Riesling is as old as the hills in Germany, but in reintroducing it, I would say, to the export markets. And she famously wrote, Keller to me are the German Montrachets. And that was really, truly, it was,
that people can relate, or the market you want to reach.
And
I'll try that
for sure. And
that sounds cool.
Jancis is very good at this, right? It's a brilliant marketing line that is also deeply true, and that's the best kind of
good one.
Yeah.
All right, I want to talk about one more region, which to me covers three things, and then I'll ask you if there's another region that we should talk about or whatever. Because, like I said, can't do everyone. The three things are Pinot Noir.
Yep.
The producer, which has caught my attention, and I told you, I think you brought in a Wasenhaus 5 years ago, and I'm like, what the? And is that the General Boden or
that is Boden? Yeah.
Right. So I want you to end with Pinot Noir and talking about red wine in Germany, which is spectacular and maybe doesn't get the attention.
Yeah.
And Wasenhaus is doing a good job. And is Boden known for more reds?
Yeah, I mean, the latitude I can't exactly speak to. Boden is, to some extent, if you're looking at a map and you know where Alsace is, right? Imagine you're looking at a book, and that is the left side of the book. So the spine is the Rhine River, and that divides Germany and France. So the left side is Alsace, and then the right side is Boden. So it's one of the more southern wine regions in Germany.
That's the longitude. They're on a similar,
roughly speaking, with Burgundy, right? So they're very similar, Burgundy, Alsace, and it's one of the warmer areas. So they have a deeper history here with Pinot Noir than in most places. But Pinot Noir was brought into Germany, and people argue whether it was the 9th century or the 14th century. Oh, it's been hundreds and hundreds of years, right? But Baden, because of that warmth, is sort of the birthplace of a kind of modern ripeness and a modern rendition of what we would think of Pinot Noir. And so there's Franz Keller and Bernard Huber, who were making very good wine. So I'm told, I wasn't, tasting at the estates in the 80s and 90s, but they were the first ones to kind of put it on the map in terms of quality Pinot Noir. And then it's kind of gone uphill and north from there, to be perfectly honest. So at this point, a good friend of mine, Robert Dentis, Soil Pimp, put together a really big Pinot Noir tasting. Spätburgunder is how you say it in Germany. Tasting
Spätburgunder, German Pinot Noir.
Yes, Spät means late, and Burgunder is just Burgundian varietal.
But so these wines are 100% Pinots.
100%.
They're
Pinot.
Not screwing around with.
I mean, there's different clones for sure.
No,
right?
no,
but,
that's different.
Yeah, but it is Pinot Noir. Yeah, 100%.
But you get a Napa Cab, it's 94% Cab, 7% Merlot. They're not. Doing much of that.
I believe that you're allowed to have 10, 15%, but it's
not much of that going on.
To be honest, and I say this often, Germany can do anything. The one thing it can't do is ripe reds, big red. Brunello, not yet, will happen in Germany, right? They can do sparkling wines, they can do crystalline white wines, they can do light red wines, they can do Pinot. You can't do a rich Merlot very well. But it's moved. Pinot Noir now is moved kind of everywhere. So you can have incredibly compelling Pinots in the Rheinhessen. Keller, should be mentioned, is on the absolute forefront of that, making some of the greatest Pinot Noirs in Germany. There's young guys like Moritz Kissinger and Karsten Sylvester in the Rheinhessen making incredible Pinot Noirs. There's people in Franconia, Peter Leipold making amazing Pinot Noirs. And shockingly enough, there's amazing Pinot Noir in the Mosel, which is actually what we're drinking right now. And to me, it is perhaps the most kind of singular and not interesting, but it is just so strange to have a wine. It's the same thing with Riesling, to have a wine that has so much intensity and so many layers of stuff, but to be so provocatively delicate.
That's for sure. And in a few minutes, kind of taste it and discuss it. Is there a region where I can afford you the opportunity to mention before we move on for a particular reason that you will tell us?
Yeah. if I were to point a region that I think needs to be discussed or at least understood, I would say it is Württemberg, which is Swabia, people sometimes call it. And it is another one of these regions that is incredibly far south, right? To some extent, the history of German wine and the history of Riesling are so intertwined that the reason my book is called Hawks and Mosels is because the Rheingau and the Rheinhessen and the Mosel are the two regions that really focused on Riesling. And anytime you deviate from the Riesling script, you lose a lot of knowledge about German wine, right? The reason we don't know more about Franconia is because it was largely dry wines and it was Sylvaner. And that didn't work with the US narrative of German wines as off-dry Riesling. The reason we don't know that much about Boden, same thing. And Württemberg, I think, has been especially hard hit because they do almost exclusively dry wines. To have an off-dry wine in Württemberg is like weird. In fact, Beurer, one of the producers I work with, does make one in certain vintages slightly off dry, and it's called Mal anders, which in German means something different, right? It's so provocative to
They
do.
have to like,
yeah,
they name it that.
Exactly right.
Like the bastard kid.
Exactly. And so in Württemberg, you have not only a dry wine culture, but it's largely a red wine culture, which again, people don't associate with Germany. So it's kind of forgotten and swept into the dustbin. And to make it even worse, there's a bunch of grapes that are either unknown, like, I don't know.
So I wanted to ask you about that. That's a good segue. Also talking about Burton. You think of Riesling. We talked about Pinot, and they're doing a great job in a lot of places. You mentioned things like Muller, Thurgau, Sylvaner. What are the varietals that are kind of not next up? I mean, next up that other bottlings besides Riesling, people are working with.
Oh, we might have to do a separate show, Sam. I have so much to say. Let's go to Württemberg. I can totally do this in some concise time. Württemberg, you have grapes that no one knows about. Very few people do. Portugieser, Dornfelder would be two. These are red wine grapes that can make interesting wines. The other ones, though, are associated with other places, right? Countries kind of like claim grapes in a weird way, right? So you have Lemberger, which is Blaufränkisch, which is what people consider an Austrian red. But grapes obviously don't care about political lines, and they grow where they grow. And so there has been Lemberger, Blaufränkisch, in this southern part of Germany for many years.
Though.
It's an amazing grape. And as much as people like hoot and holler and guffaw and salivate at the idea of the Northern Rhone and Cornas and Hermitage and these places that become very sexy, Württemberg is Cornas, but it's 400 miles further north, right? You have wines, and what I mean by that is not that like you can find Klopp and it's you can get Klopp at a 90% discount. What I mean though is you have red wines. The Blaufränkisch there is incredibly light, agile, raw, sinewy, tense, herbal, leather-like. It is Cornas-ish compared to the Southern Rhone, which would be Austria, right? Where you have Blaufränkisch that are more meaty, more ripe. And so for people who like acidity and these red wines that can be 11 and 12% and just have so much depth and structure and grip, Württemberg is, to me, like the final frontier. These wines are so good and they are so inexpensive for no reason other than no one knows what the hell Württemberg. If Württemberg rolled off the tongue and it made people think of Cornas, right? This is what French viticultural history done so well, and I mean this as a compliment, is that you say Cornas and you can close your eyes and feel this place and this wine. You know what you're going to eat. You're like there. You say Chablis and I say Württemberg and people look at me like you're shaking your head like you are now, right?
I agree.
So what?
I mean, hopefully we'll get there.
And so my mission, part of it is just talk ahead, is to when I'm on the slab and breathing my last breaths, if people say Württemberg and have some idea what that place is, I will smile and open the door to the next realm.
You will be
a happy
fulfilled.
person, 100%. So Blaufränkisch, Trollinger is another one. Trollinger is Schiava or Vernaccia, largely from northern Italy. So it's another grape that, if it has any identity, is in northern Italy, but it makes incredibly tart, light, berry fresh red wines that are so fun to drink that like they're profound. So that is Württemberg is, I think, a really special area where you can get incredible values on red wines that are low in alcohol and high in personality. And as far as grapes, it had always been Riesling will be the one that's going to, put Germany on the map. And I think Germany is modern jazz. It's just a little tricky, and it's beautiful and profound, but it is not for everyone. Sometimes it's just too high in acid and too sharp. To me, I thrill over it, but it's not for everyone. Pinot Noir, Weissburgunder, Pinot Blanc, and Chardonnay will be the grapes that will bring Germany into the commercial focus.
Right.
In many good ways and in many
Palatability
bad
to
ways.
people.
Yep.
So let me ask you this, sort of staying in that vein thread. You know, people perceive to this day, although it's getting better. I mean, Cocodac just opened some fried chicken place with 100 champagnes.
Yep.
People think of champagne as celebratory. They still do.
It's amazing what hundreds of billions of dollars will do for you, you know?
Right? You know, but we know it's a great food wine. But people also think Riesling is sweet.
Yes.
I'm not talking about the groups we run around with, but you know,
100%.
if I say I want you to try this Riesling to my friends who are not dopes, but they're not wine, they're like, I don't want that sweet crap or whatever.
Yep.
So just so people know, I mean, Riesling generally is classified. You got to help me with the dry cabinet. You know what people. If you go to a trusted retailer or even a wine store, how do you break it down so people know what they ask for?
Okay. So here's a little background, then we'll get to the actual, like, where the rubber meets the roads in terms of buying. The background is Germany, as stated, is a really northern place. So you inherently have high acidity, right? Imagine an orange tree growing in Canada. Like, you can taste that orange and be like, well, that's going to be sour, right?
Right.
You're dealing with the same thing with grapes in a northern latitude. And then Riesling is a double whammy, has one of the highest natural acidities of any grape on the face of the earth, which is why Riesling is the one grape that has this really complex relationship with residual sugar. In other words, the acid is so high sometimes you leave a little residual sugar, natural sugar from the grape, in the wine to counter it. In the same way with lemonade, right? You have it not to taste sweet, but to counter the acid. So when you're dealing with Riesling, it has a deep history in Germany that is dry. It has a deep history in Germany as off dry, but 98% of it was dry. And probably now it's 98%, right? So it has a deep, deep history here. We are just a little new to the story in the last 20 years. But that
crap we were talking about earlier, that sweet stuff kind of tainted the
sweet stuff was very popular, and it was a huge commercial force. So there was tons of money to be made there. So lots of people started manufacturing.
But that's people's perception.
Well, the wines were off dry, right? They were sweet, but it was just such a commercial force that more and more people did them, and the quality dropped and dropped and dropped.
Got it.
And the dry wine history was sort of forgotten. So that's coming back. And the quality of the dry wines has never been better. I mean, some of the reason that dry German wines are getting more and more attention is because they just are inherently better. And again, that comes back to like the reason things are changing, one of which is a return to the vineyards, and the other one is climate change, right? When you are going to buy Riesling at the store, the best way is clearly to like go to a good retailer who can speak a little bit to the wines, but there's some shorthands to know. One of them is Trocken, the word Trocken. If you see that anywhere on the label, that means it is dry. Trocken translates to dry. So if you see the word Trocken, and it can be on the front of the label or maybe the back, you may have to spin the bottle around. It can say Spätlese Trocken, Auslese Trocken. These are words you associate with sweet wines if you sort of have a little bit of history, like, Spätlese. If it says Trocken, it's dry. So Spätlese Trocken would have a certain amount of alcohol, and Auslese Trocken would just have more alcohol, right? Don't need to get too in the weeds with it. Right. Trocken means dry. The other way of doing it is if you just see a German wine that says something, let's say Steffensberg or Vonderfels or some word, Fels, Schiefer, who cares? It says a word, you don't know the word, it's just on the label, and that's the only thing. 99% of the time, that will be a dry wine or a dry tasting wine.
What are those, like towns or vineyards?
Yeah, they could be towns. So Steffensberg is a vineyard site. And again, the Mosel, at least, the history of the Mosel intertwines exactly with Burgundy. So in the 1890s and early 20th century, they would write the word of the village, Piesport, or the name of the vineyard, Goldtropschen. And if they didn't write anything else, the buyer knew it was Riesling and it was dry. In the same way you look at Musigny, and you know that it is Pinot Noir, and you know that it is dry. So it was the same exact thing. And these Cabinet, Spätlese, Auslese monikers came later in the 70s. In any event, So if you just see a word, it's probably going to be dry. It can also be a fantasy name. Keller's, one of Keller's great wines is called Von der Fels, and it just means from the rocks, right? So if you don't see anything else, if you don't see in other words, if you don't see Cabernet, Spätlese, or Auslese, it's probably a dry wine. And most of the wines you're going to see that have this sort of weird names are going to be dry. The other really easy hack is look at the alcohol. As the basic formula here is that yeast is eating sugar, and as it eats the sugar in the grape, the alcohol goes up. So I'm going to say this, and there's probably one case where this is not the truth. For the most part, a wine that has 11 to 12% alcohol or higher is dry. If a wine is 12, 13, 14, 15% alcohol, the wine's dry. If it has 6%, 7%, 8%, 9%, if you're under 10%, you're going to be sweet. So in other words, the lower the alcohol, the higher the residual sugar, the higher the alcohol.
It's a good guide too.
It's easy. Just look at a bottle. If it says blah, 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 it says Schmutterfuß or some German word, and it has 12.5% alcohol, that Schmutterfuß is dry.
That should help people, because we encourage people to try Rieslings. The quality, the value. I mean, like anything, there's expensive wines, but there's an incredible amount of great Rieslings in a really good sweet spot, price-wise, quality. All right. Is there anything we didn't cover that you want to discuss, or we didn't expand on, or we missed as a category, or we're good? I mean, I know we could do another show, but
I mean, if I could just say a few things about what I loosely call the New Germany, right? Which is kind of the book I'm working on now. This is my real book. The book available, the book that I have out now, Von Boden, 10 Years of Hawks and Moselle, is available at www.
We're going to get to that again too. I want to sell books for you.
Yeah, no, I'm kidding. But I'm working on a book now that is trying to outline this moment in German wine, which I loosely call the New Germany. It's not very original, but it gets to the point that it is a landscape now of amazing wines across the board, and the off-dry Rieslings, the Cabernets and Spätleses and Ausleses of the Mosel and beyond, I'm absolutely in love with. So I'm by no means an anti-residual sugar person. I love the wines deeply.
Sure.
But I think I would like to be honest to the complexity of German wine right now, that is a small percentage of it. And there is whatever you want, again, outside of a Napa Valley Cab or Merlot or Brunello or these really rich and unctuous reds of the Mediterranean and warmer climates, Germany cannot do that. And that is not a good or a bad thing. That is just a fact of the place. This is terroir. Beyond that, the New Germany offers so many amazing wines of incredible intensity, of lightness, of high acidity, meaning crisp and refreshing wines at very low alcohol levels. And to some extent, that signature of a crisp, refreshing wine is apparent in German wines, from Pinot Noir through Lemberger, Blauschiefer, through Trollinger, through all these reds, as well as through the kind of canonical grapes of this country, which are Riesling and Sylvaner, and then getting into, varieties that have been there for a while, but are more French looking, right? I would say, as in Weissburgunder, so Pinot Blanc, and one of the newest additions is Chardonnay. So if you like light, crisp wines, Germany is still a place to go for incredible quality and incredible value. There's certainly Keller. There are a number of producers who have very righteously and appropriately have reached kind of stratospheric prices and great reputations. That is deserved, and I'm happy for them and their successes. But there are still so many amazing producers that are less lionized and make incredible wines at really fair prices. As I get older, I'm not more fond. There's just something amazing to be had about a $20 bottle of wine, a $25 bottle of wine that is made by a great person and has personality and depth and all these things.
That's the whole gig.
That's the magic.
To be just lit up.
Yes.
By something at that price point where, the quality and what was put into it. Just for perspective, in Germany alone, I mean, how many different growers do you represent?
That's an interesting question. I don't know.
Ballpark.
Yeah, 30.
I'm trying to make a point.
Yeah, 30, 40 maybe.
Yeah, I mean, 30, 40, like you said, Keller has, sort of become iconic, hard to get some of it. but all the way down to what you just said. I mean,
Yeah.
for $25, we'll pick a grower and a Riesling that we think will rival any experience with another white
I mean,
wine.
the most obvious example, Keller's brother-in-law, this Florian Fouth is his name, lives in Westhofen, which is the next village over where Wittmann is, a very famous. And the wines are incredibly good, and they're incredibly affordable and available, right? There's this really twisted part of human psyche. You want the rare, you want the thing you can't have, right? The grass is always greener,
Always.
that thing, always. But it has become so prominent and so accentuated by this algorithm Instagram world where you see labels and labels and labels, and we ignore so much beauty that is right there at our fingertips in favor of things we can have. And sometimes I do that pursuit too, right? I'm involved in this whole world too, and so I'm on Instagram and coveting things I can't get. But man, the amount of stuff that is just there and affordable and beautiful is there's, the Banksy, the artist, right? There's this thing he did, I think it was 2018, where he just set up a table where he had someone, right? Banksy doesn't do it himself, set up a table in Central Park and sold prints that would be in a gallery for $50, $60, $70,000, sold them for $20. And they're right there, but we're not looking for great things in Central Park on our daily walk, right? But it is there. It's right under your fingertips, and all
Point
you have
well
to
made
do,
by him, yeah.
all you have to do is really look. And the wines of Germany are there, and they're right in front of us, and they're available, and they're affordable. You just have to open your eyes.
Well, I always said two things. I mean, if you're getting into wine and you're trying to figure out, how to drink the right stuff, there's always two things that'll help you. If you can identify a wine store in your neighborhood, town that is not like Bottle King or Total Wine, nothing against them, but are smaller, more curious, and you talk to them and tell them what you like, their whole thing is curation and making you happy. The other thing is, if they're not that good at it, just turn bottles around and look for, importers. If you go and turn everything around and, most of them won't be Von Boden, but a lot will. You know what's coming from there, just like you would with Kermit Lynch and France or whatever, everywhere now. So that's important stuff. All right, we got to end it there. We have to do two things. We have to do the wine list. I'm going to ask you 5 questions, and we're going to taste this Uli Stein wine, and then I'm getting you out of here. On the wine list, same 5 questions I asked you 5 years ago. Same 5 questions.
I don't remember what you asked me nor what I said.
Same 5 questions I've asked people way more prominent than you, and even more intelligent. And most people. All right. So here's the first question. What are you drinking now? And that applies to, is it for work? Are you drinking Württemberg wines? Or do you need a break and the seasons are changing? So you're going red to white? What's like today, yesterday, tomorrow?
What did I open yesterday? I think I had a Vonderfels last night, a Keller wine.
Okay.
Here would be the honest truth, right? I drink psychotic amounts of Riesling, and it is a grape. And this is probably
out of love and research.
Yeah, I mean,
for love, it sounds like.
I have engineered my life insofar as love is the research, right? And vice versa. I'm not sure how.
So you're drinking more Riesling than anything.
I'm not sure how I got this lucky to do the thing that is exact. I do believe, Sam, I was put on the face of the earth to talk about German wine, which is
so far so good,
absurd and sublime, and I take it as an honor. So yeah, after
but
25
I agree
years,
with you. There's the old, I could turn my head, look out there and go, who does this guy think he is? That's what you're doing, and you're doing it successfully. All right, so I'm going to keep that simple, all right? This is it's the goofiest question on the list, but based on what you think, what you do, what you drink, what's your favorite wine and food pairing? Not what is a good wine and food pairing or, what bon appetit. What works for you? And it's obviously something you're not eating, every week, every month. What's that
I'll give 2 real quick. One is Riesling and pizza.
Why? Because you get champagne and pizza. You get some Italian.
Because Riesling is about acidity and pizza is about the slop, right? The glorious slop, the oil from the cheese, the gooiness of the dough, the viscosity of the tomato sauce.
Makes total sense.
And it's a scalpel. And it's bizarre, right? It's not obvious in instinctual, it's intellectual and creative and fun and a little bit absurd, right? And I like these things that are all those things.
I've had every great sommelier on this show. I've asked these questions to them, to other winemakers, writers, the Eric Asimovs, and nobody's ever given me that answer. I've gotten champagne and pizza maybe a half a dozen times, which ain't bad. Champagne and fried chicken, but pizza and Riesling, and it makes sense the way you described it. And you said you had a second one.
The second one is oysters, which are one of my favorite things on the face of the earth, and dry Riesling. Uli Stein's Blauschiefer, which is a profound bottle of wine that costs $25 on the shelf. And with oysters, again, you're talking about like lime zest and sea salt and extremely high acidity. To my mind, and this is probably, controversial, I think dry Mosel Riesling is a better pairing with oysters than Muscadet. So I'm going to throw that out there. Raise some feathers,
example. My example is, okay. So wait,
Muscadet is a rubber knife, and Riesling is a scalpel.
Which Uli Stein bottling did you say
It's called Blauschiefer, which means blue slate.
B-L-A-U?
B-L-A-U, and then Schiefer, S-C-H.
Second word, S-C-H-I-E-F-F-E-R or something.
Any Stein will do.
Okay. Well, yeah, that's what's cool about him. All right. Third question. Favorite wine restaurant and or bar? Who's got the selection? Who's got the vibe? People?
There's so
but here's the deal. And I got to say this every time. I'm so redundant. I'm not asking you to give me your top three. I'm just, what comes to mind? Because I don't want somebody to come up to you and say, I listened to you on the great, how come you didn't mention my place?
I've got the place. But I want to intro.
I'll always say Pascaline and Chambers.
Yeah.
But that, it's special in that sense.
Yeah. But here would be one as an importer. There's so many people who supported me in restaurants and retail, so it's a little tricky.
Even harder for you. And I swear I'm not setting you up.
No, I know.
You can defer now.
But I do want to point out maybe not so obvious choices. Jin An is a restaurateur at Norita, and man, it's so. The indescribables is what I have to describe, right? It's an incredible wine list. Jin puts so much love and passion into curating that list. So many of the wines he's buying from retail, and he's making no money on it, but he wants to curate a story and have the wines there. I mean, the sacrifices and the effort that he puts into that place. And it is such a warm, inviting, spiritual place to do. I have not met anyone in the wine business who works as hard as he does. I'm sure there's people who work as hard as he does. He works so hard, and he always has a smile on his face. And he is one of these people that can be going through really tough times, and he's nothing but supportive and inquisitive about how he can help you or how he can make your day better. I mean, he's a profound human, and Norita is one of those places that has a really strong community of people that go there because of him. And the food is amazing. The place is great, but it is the people, and I have to give him a shout out. And it is for people who are into German wines. It's a profound German list.
I sincerely agree, because it's one of those places that is a wine place because of him and the environment. And I had never been there until last Thursday night. Of all things, I went to a dinner with Nicola Glumino, the winemaker at Pichon Lalonde.
Whoa.
We're thinking all these cool, funky. Here I am with like a Bordeaux guy, and everybody brought wines and some of the craziest stuff. So it was a lot of fun. But he also brought a bottle out, and I never met him. And I told my story. I said, I do this podcast.
Yeah, you should have
everyone I know goes there. You can't look at Instagram and not see somebody there, right?
He's an
in a good
person.
way. And he just lit up, and he was that kind of guy and everything.
And again, there's a million great people in New York and throughout the U.S. and the world.
I think that's a good example, and you're not all right. So that checks that box really well. All right, favorite all-time wine, and the question used to be, like, I'd go to Aldo Som. What's the most expensive rare wine you ever drank? You're the guy. I don't care. What's that wine that was a gateway, that was transcendental, that changed the way you thought about it, that is an important wine? Is there one or two?
Yeah.
Can you identify?
Yeah. Can I talk about a genre?
You can talk about anything.
Cabinet Trocken. So I'd say 2012 Weiser Künstler Geisfad Cabinet Trocken specific, but any wine that's that says Cabinet, which is a light style of German wine, and Trocken meaning dry. To me, Cabinet Trocken is a sacred genre. It is the only one in the world of wine that I know of that has the highest goal of wine in mind, which is to communicate a very specific place, so a single vineyard, let's say, and to do it in the most diminutive, most austere and essential form, right? So you can talk about Petit Chablis, but Petit Chablis is not a single vineyard. The riper Grand Cru Clos or Valmure, these are the stately wines. And the Cabernet Trocken is the only genre of wine that is a profound, world-class, age-worthy, single vineyard specific bottling that tries to convey this place at the most essential. So Cabernet Trocken can be dry and have 10% alcohol, 10.5, 11%. And they are the singing. It is the chorus of one angel as the sun comes up. They're just so petite, and they taste like you know what they taste like? They taste like mineral water with some essence of divinity.
It's a good one. So that was before you had Von Boden. Were you at Crush then?
Yeah.
And he's a grower. I hate to use
Visor
the word.
or
Visor.
Yeah.
He's with your portfolio, right?
Yeah.
So that's kind of fun.
Yeah.
How do you ever tell him that, or am I the only guy who asks you that?
You're probably the only person that's ever. I rant about Cabernet Trocken often, but that's specific.
That's
just one of a million profound Cabernet Trockens.
I didn't mention this, but I post these answers on our social because the fun thing is, what do you think? What are you drinking? All right, here's the last question.
Right.
You should be pretty good at this.
Finally. Something I'm good at.
I wouldn't finally. Recommend to me best wine around 15, 20, 22 bucks retail. Recommend a red, recommend a white. You can go category like Muscadet Riesling. I would almost let you go wherever you want on this. If you just want to stay in the wheelhouse of Germany or even in Von Boden, I'm okay with that because you could handle it. But I won't let you say Riesling's a great value. You could find, I'll need specifics then.
All right.
So give me a red, give me a white.
All right. I'll do 2. 15 is very hard. I do think
20, 22.
20 to 25 at 22 is easier.
Try to stay under 25.
Okay. I guess for a red, I would go to Trollinger. So again, back to Württemberg, and Trollinger is a grape that's, if you know the northern Italian regions, it's Schiava is the grape, and Vernaccia, same name for northern Italian.
A little bigger wine or no?
No, they're light.
They're lighter.
Super light.
Okay.
Really low in alcohol. Again, like kind of tart, sour, like bright red fruit. They can have 11% alcohol. Just they're sort of like the Cabernet Trocken of red wines. They're people talk about chillable reds now, right? It's almost like a rosé, just like went 2 steps too far, right? But they have that essence of a white wine and a red wine, and they're just so easy to drink. They're really easy to pair with food. Again, they have this nerve of acidity. Joachim Beurer, this estate I work with in
Boyer?
Beurer.
The German Boyer.
Beurer, yeah. Is in Württemberg, and he makes a stunning Trollinger that, frankly, Asimov has written about a good amount. And it's just like an angelic little bottle of wine.
And it's in the mid-20s?
Yeah, $20.
Wow.
22.
That's a hit.
That's amazing.
All right, I'll take that as a red. You can go to white. I don't
And
need
as a
more than
white, let's go to Sylvaner, which is
Sylvaner, the varietal.
Sylvaner is a grape, and it is a grape that doesn't really have a great international identity. It's a little bit, it has a lot of different faces. It's kind of a chameleon, but the German version, I do believe Germany is kind of the homeland of this grape. In Rheinhessen, and even not better, but also in Franconia, there are Sylvaners a little bit like Riesling. Sylvaner is a little bit like Chardonnay, meaning it has a little bit more texture, a little bigger shoulders, but it doesn't have the belly fat of Chardonnay. It's a little more mineral. It's a little more structured. It's a little more crisp and crystalline. And say like a Sylvaner Trocken from Peter Leipold, a young grower who worked with Keller and Leger Belair and worked with really fancy estates, but makes these amazing wines. We have a Cabernet Trocken Sylvaner from him that definitely retails at $20. Maybe if a retailer's working on a lean margin, $19, maybe up to 25, but in that ballpark. And it tastes like mineral water from the gods with a little bit.
The beautiful
bit
thing
of a
is
punch.
That's a tough question for some people, especially the red.
I could like
and
go
not
on for 20
for
minutes.
you,
No,
which is kind of a credit to the quality and the value and all that. All right, we got to wrap up our last feature. I'm going to reach over and you're going to pour me some more wine.
all right.
So every week.
Oh, gotcha.
Every week at the end of the show, we do a feature called the Weekly Wine Sip, where we taste and evaluate a wine. It would be crazy for an importer or a winemaker not to bring their wine in. So I asked you to bring something in. So you brought in.
I brought in Uli Stein, stick with me here, a Spätburgunder Cabernet Trocken. Can you decode that, Sam?
Spätburgunder is Pinot Noir. Trocken is, wait, give it to me again. Spätburgunder, Trocken.
Spätburgunder Cabernet Trocken.
All right, so I don't know why it's in Pinot, but drier or
Dry. Trocken means dry.
right?
And what does Cabernet indicate?
I forgot.
Lightness.
Okay.
So a Cabernet historically, not historically, but as per the 70 wine law, is the lightest, kind of the first harvest, the first quality harvest, as it were. And so it's most common with a Riesling to see a Cabernet or to Cabernet Trocken, what I was talking about earlier, but it can be applicable to anything. And so we have a Pinot Noir Cabernet Trocken. And all that means is Stein was one of the first to really make great quality Pinot Noir in the Mosel, and is a huge part of reintroducing this grape to the culture of the Mosel. It had been there forever. But he makes a Cabernet Trocken. So it's a Pinot Noir. This is a 2019.
So it's got a little bottle age.
It's got a little bottle age. I brought this from my cellar just for you. I thought I'd go, well, some pizzas maybe we might have afterward here at Roberta's. It's 11.5%. It's on steep slate slopes. Everything is done by
Say
hand
that
here.
3 times fast.
I know. Sleep
forget, I
state
can't say it
slopes. It is light, fresh, layered, structured. It's a wine, 5, 7, 8 years. I think it's in a perfect drinking window now. But it's just
question. I'm
yeah.
always curious. What'd you say? It's an 18 or a 19?
This is 2019.
So 19. What's the current vintage?
This wine
22?
would be 22. Yeah. 22.
What would the 22? How would it vary from this?
22 is a little bit of a riper vintage, probably.
Okay.
And it's younger, so it's hard.
You know
to
what?
say.
I realize that's a dumb question
hard.
because it's more about vintage than bottle aging, and that's what I was thinking.
Yeah, it's hard.
So
it's hard to
you
do.
You can't do that. All right, so let's do a quick evaluation. The color on this is kind of a light. What color red is
light?
that?
It's a light kind of brick red, and I would say it is bricking a little bit toward the edge. You see that kind of brown. Coming
it
in,
is
so
a bricky red,
right?
a bit translucent.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah, clear, but it's it doesn't have that much sulfur. He's adding sulfur clearly, but it's this is 5 years old at this point, so it's
right,
getting it's in the
give
zone.
me the nose descriptors. I always say I suck at that.
Yeah. So to my nose, has red fruit, but kind of tart and sour. It has a lot of like spice, so dried spice. Like stems and green things, flowers dried up, really floral and aromatic. So all sorts of kitchen
Does he
spices.
put stems in this? Is this a whole cluster or not?
It would depend on the vintage. I don't believe so,
Right.
though. To do stems in the Mosel is not super common.
No.
So if he is, it's a little bit, but you
Yeah,
still
then-
get this kind of like this dusty kitchen spice thing to it.
Spicy, red for sure.
Leather, right? There's all
Yeah.
sorts of like.
Definitely
It's
leather.
very soil driven. I do get minerality and a kind of clarity to it, right? And there's energy.
It's a great nose. When I just pulled away, I got something else.
And you
All
taste the maturity, the years, right? Like it's just layers of a little bit of like tobacco and kind of like wet soil, sous-bois, right? The like forest floor thing. I think it's in a perfect drinking window and will drink well for another 3 or 4 years. But
The mouthfeel is sort of a medium,
yeah,
not thin at all.
no.
No glycerin-y or plus, just a beautiful sits in the mouth. Does the palate replicate the nose that you gave me, or some things pop up on the palate?
I think on the palate you get more kind of dark fruit and more of that kind of sour cherry, and it doesn't quite have the herbal detailing. And
What
the,
dark fruit? I
like
if
a
you
crushed
should-
like a crushed blackberry
Right.
or something like that, right?
What's
Black cherry maybe.
Yeah, more black cherry. What's a good food pairing with a wine like this, with a little bottle age?
I mean, honestly, it can kind of do anything, right? It's delicate, so and it has great acidity, so it will pair with pizza probably pretty well, and kind of lighter
I think
fare.
this has.
It could, with chicken, any kind of light to medium fare with sauce, because you do have the acid to kind of like
You
stand up to
forget
it.
that the sauce may dominate the dish, so you got to pair to the sauce.
Yeah.
You know.
So you need sauce that has some texture and some richness to it, but not too much. This is not a Brunello to pair with ossobuco. You know what I mean? It needs a little more delicacy in the fare that's reflecting the delicacy in the bottle.
It's also a very fun label.
Yeah.
Well, for me, this is a bit of a treat. And I say it's a treat almost like somebody brought in, something rare and crazy.
Well,
I mean,
this is both rare and crazy. It's just not expensive.
But that's my point. That was the point I was getting to, which I love that. And I love, what you do. All right. I got to do a quick wrap up. We got to get out of here. So if you have a question, suggestion, wine happening or event, hit me up at sam@thegrapenation.com. That's sam@thegrapenation.com. Subscribe to the Grape Nation podcast on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, Google Podcasts, or wherever you get your pods. If you like the podcast, leave us a review. The idea of subscribing is that, each week these podcasts will show up and they're there. You don't have to look for them or whatever. You can follow us on Instagram at sbenruby and on Twitter at benruby. I know those are two different handles, but you can get to us with the hashtag The Grape Nation. We are on Facebook at The Grape Nation. As I mentioned, we'll post Steven's wine list answers. He gave us some cool recos there. I will give you all the info on the weekly wine sip, the Uli Schnein wine. So, Steven, let's go over this again slowly. If people have been intrigued and want to purchase the book, the best place for them to do that is
on my website.
Okay.
And so it's just vonboden.com.
It's set up where the book, you can go there in commerce, you could pay for it.
Just go to the news
shipping.
feed. You'll see the book advertisement. Oftentimes it's on the homepage. The homepage revolves a little bit, but click through the news feed. You'll see it. You buy through PayPal and we send it to you. So it's there, and I'm running down to my last copies, and I'm not going to reprint it. So
yes, you are.
I'm going to do a new book. So
I'm working on it. Too long. I recommend another. I'll tell you how much off air copies. So that's where you can get the book. That same website, if you want more info on Von Boden, on the producers, and we mentioned it easily a half a dozen times, all these well-written, deep thoughts and descriptions and all of that. That's on the website. If we want to follow you on social media,
really only do Instagram at this point. Just at Von Boden.
VOM.
VOM is in Mary, B is in boy, OD is in David, EN is in Nancy.
That's where the activity is.
From the soil, vonboden.com.
All right. Thank you to our guest, Steven Bitterolf. Thank you to our engineer, Armin, and everyone at the Heritage Radio Network. I'm Sam Ben Ruby, and you've been listening to The Grape Nation. The Grape Nation is powered by Simplecast. Thanks for listening to Heritage Radio Network, food radio supported by you. Keep in touch at heritageradionetwork.org/subscribe.